are kindergarten through 6th grade, come on up and join me in the front. You are going to want to grab a pen or pencil from your mom or dad. If you do not have one, you're going to need a pen or pencil. We have some extras here if you can't grab one from mom or dad. Come on up and grab a seat on the front here. All right, I need you to keep this face down. Do not turn it over until I tell you you can turn it over, okay? Does anybody need a pen too? We have some extras, so leave it face down, all right? Some of you are very, very smart, so you're gonna get a head start if you peek at it, and I can't have any people do any peeking. All right, so keep it the paper face down, all right? You can keep your eyes open and be ready to go there. You need a pen. All right, I'll get you one there, Easton. Yeah, there you are. There you are. All right. Okay. All right. There you are, Easton. Okay. I have some really great prizes here. I got Mike and Ike's and I got beef jerky bites. Okay, all right? So, I only have 5, okay? You can work with a partner if you want to, okay? But the first 5 people that can hand their piece of paper to my wife, okay? I'm gonna take the attention off of me for a second, okay? The first 5 people, even if you've worked with a partner, that can hand their piece of paper to my wife with the code cracked, okay? Then you can pick out a prize. All right? Are you ready? On your marks, get set, go. All right, we're timing you. Let's count down from 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 11, 12, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop, put your pens down. Does anybody have the code cracked? Oh, you know what? I know what I forgot. Forgot to give you the key here. Yeah, I was wondering why nobody had it there. I mean, man alive, it was just, did you think I really forgot? No, okay, yeah. All right, so I need you to put your papers face down again, okay? All right, and I need you to partner up with somebody because I think I only have enough for 2 or 3 people to work together. 2 or 3 people to work together is fine. Okay, all right. I'll tell you when you can turn it over. Okay, I'll tell you when you can turn it over. Easton, you work with them, okay? There you go. All right, now let's try to see if you can crack the code, and this time we'll have you bring it to me, okay? All right? And see if you can crack the code and get the words figured out that are on that sheet of paper. Set and go. Flip it over. Use the code to see if you can figure out what goes in the blank. Each code on your paper has a word that's going to it. If you want to get the answers, you can look at Daniel chapter 5. Each little square there has a symbol. Each symbol has a letter. You got to find the symbol that goes to the letter. You only have to send up one person from your group once you get it. I'll give you a hint. If you're struggling, you're really only going to be looking at the middle of the chart. Only the middle of the chart. It's just the capital letters that you're after. Just the middle of the chart.
Right here, right here. That's the middle. This is the middle. Like M, that's M.
Correct.
Wait, that's M. Oh yes, that's M. Okay. E. Wait, what? E. That is E. Wait, E right here. Wait, the point is E.
Looks like it is. Yep. Right here. You got it? All right. Okay, come on back up here, Ella. Ella's going to read it for you, okay? What does it say?
It says, mean, tackle, person.
All right, we'll try here for Bryce and Alan. Hang on for just a second.
Mean, tackle, person.
One more try. Yep.
Mean, tackle, up. Wait, you phrasing.
All right, okay, here we go. Ella and Abby, what do you want? Who did you work with?
It was 3.
Us three? You want to choose? All right, have a seat, everybody. All right. It is, are you ready? Mene, tekel, upharsin. Mene, tekel, upharsin. It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Yep. Keep your sheets, keep your pens, keep your code breakers with you, and you can go ahead and head back to your seat. And I will tell you during tonight's message what that means. Mene, tekel, upharsin. Everybody together, ready? Mene, tekel, upharsin. Okay? Parents, when your children disobey you, you say, Mene, tekel, upharsin. The kingdom has been taken away from you. You say, Pastor Dave, that really wasn't fair. You had the kids try to break a code without a key. You had them try to figure out what this code was. And for those of you who are Microsoft fans, I should have put it up on the screen for you. It was Wingdings. You ever accidentally changed your font to Wingdings and you type and you're like, what in the world? Okay, all right. And it's just all these symbols that each symbol represents a letter. So they were trying to figure that out. Well, it's got to be at least the top 10 flannel graph board stories, doesn't it? From Daniel chapter 5, at least the top 10, maybe even the top 5. I don't know if it could squeeze its way into the top 5, but in Daniel chapter 5, we have a kind of a time lapse that takes place between Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5. And we come to the handwriting on the wall. We still use this as a metaphor when talking to one another, don't we? Well, how's it going? Well, I'm just waiting for the handwriting on the wall, getting ready to purchase a house. We're just waiting for the handwriting on the wall, Well, we're making a big decision about employment. Well, we're just waiting for the handwriting on the wall, okay? All right? And let's be honest here. I mean, in a Baptist church, we can raise our hands a little bit, can't we? How many of you have had God's hand show up and write on the wall what you were supposed to do? Anybody? My hand can't go up. So the application of this passage is not wait for God to write on the wall, okay? Now, some of you were up at camp this last week. Some of you were up at camp the week before. And you know that the barn has been remodeled inside of the barn. But there are areas of the barn where you can still go into the old barn where people have written on the walls. And in college, my roommate for 3 years was Ken Fields. That is Bob and Eileen's oldest son. He pastors over in Chicago. And Ken and I were roommates for 3 years. And so let me just... you know that 50s song, Come a Down, Doobie Doo Down Down, breaking up is hard to do. Okay, let's just say that Ken and I had many young ladies that we dated that either they broke up with us or we broke up with them before we met these beautiful women that we ended up marrying, okay? And if you go to the barn and pull some of the new siding off, you can find an area that says Ken Casanova Fields. And it has a list of ladies underneath his name. As some of them are scratched out and some of them are scratched out and some of them are scratched out. And Joanna Phillips, at the time now Fields, when she was dating Ken, she stumbled across this in the barn, and she crossed out the last name that was on the list, and wrote in pen her name on the list, and it stuck. And now the new siding's up, and it's covered it, and it's sealed for good, okay? But I dare say that probably you aren't going to walk through the barn and read what's on the wall of the barn and be confused. But Belshazzar was very confused. Now, the picture here, the Rembrandt painting, it pictures it being written in Hebrew, and poor Belshazzar did not know Hebrew. And so that's why it went south for him. He just didn't know Hebrew. I'm not sure if Rembrandt was a Christian. I'm not sure that the handwriting on the wall was, in fact, what? Hebrew. But we do come to this passage, and we do give this account as a Sunday school lesson, and we bring our kids to this lesson of God writing on the wall and telling the kingdom of Babylon it's going to crumble, it's going to fall, and God using Daniel one last time to deliver that message. But we can very quickly bring this into an area where we're applying this in a way that is not the authorial intent of the passage. For instance, mystifying God's leading to be actually handwriting on the wall, saying that God will use anthropomorphisms, he'll take on bodily form to be able to communicate, and even to kind of take a passage like this and turn it into a message against alcohol, or a message against, just pagan kings. And again, are there principles in the Word of God that apply to many of those things? Absolutely. But I think we have to go to what the author's intent is here. And really, I think what we have to remember is that God raises up kingdoms, and God tears down kingdoms. But God holds mankind accountable at all levels. And the greatest of the great kings will be held accountable to God and God alone. And so as we look at this passage, you're going to find that Belshazzar is going to try to lean into his worldly wealth. He's going to try to lean upon his power, and even try to pull from human wisdom to address this confrontation that comes to him from God. And I think we want to be also careful as we look at a passage like this to not sit there and say, okay, the point of this passage is to get ungodly people to act a little bit more godly. Now listen, does the regress of our culture, does that trouble our hearts? Absolutely. I'm going to talk a little bit about the accident with the Titan submarine that tried to make it down to the Titanic, and how that's been in the news, and it's been a mixed emotion of responses to that, hasn't it? I read one Twitter feed that said, well, there you go. The ocean has claimed some more rich white millionaires. And I'm like, that is not what the point of this is at all. It's not what the point of it is at all. And while I watch all this news come about what happened and the implosion and the remains that they're finding, and they'll probably never find human remains, and James Cameron, the director of the Titanic film, saying, I knew what happened immediately. Well, yeah, because you made a movie that was junk about the Titanic, if I can say it that way. You didn't know what happened. Nobody really will ever really know what truly happened. And in the wake of all that, they're already starting to talk about making a film of the sinking of the Titan submarine and make a movie about it, okay? The point is that, did your heart not at some point in time this last week say, I wonder if anybody ever shared the gospel with those 5 people? I wonder if any of those 5 people ever were introduced to the Lord Jesus Christ as their Savior. As believers, that should have crossed our heart at some point in time. Instead of just the cultural ebb and flow that comes in the wake of something like that. You know, I don't think we can expect ungodly people to act more godly to make them a little bit more savable. But it is interesting that God holds all men in account. Now, when you read Daniel chapter 5 and verse number 1, it says, Belshazzar, king, made great feast of thousands of his lords and drank wine in the presence of thousands. And you're left here asking yourself, what just happened? I thought we had Nebuchadnezzar. I thought Nebuchadnezzar got his kingdom restored, and it was a great kingdom according to the end of chapter 4. What kind of portal did we just jump through here? Okay, all right? And how did we end up with Belshazzar? And then I saw a list, Pastor Dave, of the kings of Babylon, and I don't see Belshazzar on there. So is the Bible lying to us here? Okay? And again, we looked at Nebuchadnezzar, and then there were these other kings in the middle there. Okay? Interestingly enough, the king that was preceded, Nabonidus, was actually named after one of the Babylonian gods, Marduk. Nabonidus is king in Babylon right now, but he was a pagan king. He was a religious pagan king, and he was not in Babylon for about a decade of time because he was chasing these Babylonian rituals, religious rituals, all over the countryside. And he left a vassal king in command in Babylon, specifically not the whole kingdom of Babylon, but the actual metropolis of Babylon. And that man's name was Belshazzar. And so this vassal king, or this ruling that was taking place kind of in congruency, we know from history that Nabonidus is the king of Babylon, but he's not in Babylon metropolitan right now. Interestingly enough, history tells us that this banquet took place actually on October 12th, 539 BC. We know that from Babylonian writings of Herodias. And we know that 2 days before that the Persian Empire conquered Opis, which is actually the modern Baghdad of today, which is 50 miles away from Babylon. So when I heard this account in Sunday school, I always interpreted it as he just threw a big party to have a big party. But really, I think what you're going to find out is that this party, or if this celebration or this feast, was actually a worship service to the gods of Babylon to protect them from the coming threat of the Persians. And you're going to find that out with what Belshazzar does here in this account. Go with me, if you can, to verse number 2. And while he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave some of the command to bring out the gold and the silver vessels, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple that had been in Jerusalem. And the king and the lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. And they brought out the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God and had been in the temple of Jerusalem. And the king, the lords, the wives, and his concubines drank from them. Now, many people have questioned again, okay, who is this Belshazzar? And now he says that Nebuchadnezzar is his father. How in the world can this be? How in the world do you end up with this connection? And the idea of father here is probably a reference more to the regal reign or the regal position, as somebody would say they're related to in a line of kings. And it could be a biological son, estranged. We know that kings were polygamous, and it could be a relation in that way, but it probably was more a reference to the actual line of being king in Babylon. And recognizing the threat of the coming invasion or coming of Persia, then we have to go back to, where did Babylon conquer and where did Babylon conquer well? Oh yeah. They conquered Israel. And when we conquered Israel, we pillaged and plundered. Let's bring out all the pillage and plundering from Israel and remind ourselves that Babylon conquers. And Babylon will not be conquered. And so let's bring those things out, and let's have this idolatrous feast with those implements, reminding ourselves that the gods of Babylon conquered the gods of Israel. And if that happened, then we don't have to worry about this threat of Persia. And so they bring out what God has referenced as sacred. You remember, if you can go way back in your mind here, okay? Back to our series we did in the book of Exodus. God gave Moses instructions on what to build for the tabernacle, and God gave Solomon instructions of what to build for the temple. And those things and those utensils and those things in the temple were sacred to God. The common Israelite could not step into the temple and say, hey, I misplaced my goblet. Can I just borrow this one here today? I just need a replacement here today, and walk out of the temple with it. They were God's, and then God's alone, and used for God's service and service alone. And those are the things which were plundered when Babylon invaded, and those are the things that are used now in this plea for the gods of the Babylonians to protect Babylon from Persia. And so what is sacred is actually desecrated. And first thing we'll see here in just kind of some subpoints that we want to make here. First thing is that profaning that which is divinely sacred, you could add to that if you want to, is always going to be divinely judged. Now, we might sit there and say, you know what, Pastor Dave, I'm trying to find the application here. I really am, okay? I don't think I have any temple vessels that are in my house. I'm not sure that my Casey's cup counts as sacred. So help me understand, how does this apply to us? Well, am I the only one that has noticed within Christianity, and I say Christianity with a big, wide umbrella, how we have just kind of regressed into taking what is sacred and making it casual and making it compliant? Am I the only one that's listened to a podcast or watched a YouTube video of a pastor preaching, and he makes the statement, "Oh my God," as just a flippant statement and keeps on rolling without a blink of his eye or a bat of his tongue? Have we accepted into our culture, our Christian culture, things that God says still are sacred and made them just common use? I told you the story before about a youth pastor that was on a wilderness trip with his teens, and he just really felt burdened that they needed to celebrate the Lord's table out in the wilderness. And so they opened a bottle of Coca-Cola, and they gave everybody a little cap full of Coca-Cola, and they busted out some Lay's potato chips, and they handed out some Lay's potato chips. And he goes on to say, we just had the most beautiful time out in the wilderness celebrating the Lord's broken body and his shed blood with Lay's potato chips and Coca-Cola. And again, you know, like, yeah, I could go for some Lay's potato chips at our Lord's table service. That would really help a lot. And Coca-Cola, I'm in. And he was trying to make the point that it's not these things that are sacred. It's what they stand for. And I'm like, well, isn't it prescribed what they are and prescribed what they stand for? Aren't they connected? And listen, should he have done the Lord's table in the wilderness or not? I'm not here to beat him on the head, okay? All right? But I am interesting to watch him say, we're going to take something that's very, very sacred and just make it casual. Just make it compliant. And really, that's the downfall of Belshazzar. He takes what God says is sacred and he brings it into his own pagan worship. And God, in fact, says he's going to be judged because of it. Interestingly enough, the Babylonians had a whole list of gods, okay? I mean, a whole list of gods. I found an online website that had the top 15 Mesopotamian gods, okay? In case you ever want to know the top 15, okay? I think in Babylon, though, we can make a quick connect to these three gods and quick connect to these three gods in this way. First of all, Marduk was called the King of Gods. Now, again, Jesus Christ himself will named when he returns with a sash that says King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It should not be a surprise to us that pagan gods try to assume that position of the King of all gods. There are some places in history that we've actually discovered that Marduk has actually received human sacrifices, which God never prescribed. You say, well, he told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Well, that was a test of faith. And what? He stopped him. And God provided a lamb, a beautiful picture of the gospel in that. Well, Marduk was a god of ferocious violence. He was seen as the one who would send thunderstorms, and that's how the Babylonians would cry out to him. And I showed you just there before that the king before Nabopolassar, what did he do? Or Nabonidus, the one before him, what did he do? He named himself after the king of gods. Nabu was the king of God's wisdom. He was a son of Marduk, and so as Marduk had the kind of the raw power, then what came behind him was his son who had all wisdom. So again, on a night like tonight, when Belshazzar is going to cry out for wisdom, he's going to be crying out to Marduk, he's going to be crying out to Nabu to go ahead and protect him. And the last one would be Sin or Sign, the god of the moon god. It was specifically a god that was honored by Nabonidus. He had images of it actually put into the walls of this god, put into the walls of Babylon, so that he would protect Babylon. And of course, the worship of Sign took place at night, where they would worship him and worship the moon as him being the one who could protect. And the list could go on, okay? And watch how this plays out in the passage. You look at verse number 4, and they're drinking from these vessels from the temple of God. Into verse number 5, and God confronts the pride of the wicked. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. Okay? All right? Now, some of us are like, hey, I can relate to the hip. Okay? All right? I mean, I can relate to the hip. But have you ever been so scared your knees have been knocking together? Maybe you had to give a speech in public and your kneecaps were just dancing up and down. He sees this handwriting on the wall and he is scared spitless, if I could say it that way. And the king cried out aloud, bring out the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. And the king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Well, there's your answer right there. Why would he give away third place? Okay, all right. You know, we had first place, second place, third place. Why would we give away third place? What's the honor in third place? Well, he can't give away second place because he's in second, okay? We're not going to get into who's on first and what's on second or anything like that. Okay, he can't give away second. He is second, okay? But he can give away third, so he offers the best he can. calls them out to be third in the kingdom. And all the king's wise men, how'd they do? They came and they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king its interpretation. Then Belshazzar was greatly troubled, and his countenance changed, and the lords were astonished. It's all fallen apart here. Interestingly enough, he's following the exact same pattern that what? That Nebuchadnezzar followed. Call in all the wise men, and when they fail, then you're a ship without a paddle. And he calls them in, and they can't interpret it. And I think we also have to be careful of number 3 here. We have to beware of false confidence in human arrogance. I think it's interesting that Belshazzar follows the pattern of all the other Babylonian kings and leans upon human wisdom and human arrogance to give him this interpretation. Now, he is not offering a small thing here. A royal purple robe means you're put into royalty, a gold chain around your neck, and then what? Third in the kingdom. Not bad. So come up with an answer to it the best you can, and they can't do it. And so he is left troubled in his thoughts. I'm not saying that the Titan submarine was an act of arrogance necessarily. I think there maybe was warning signs that perhaps that trip should not have taken place, and I'll leave that to the news to sort out in some of those things. But I thought it was very, very interesting that the Titan submarine was trying to make its way to the Titanic. And you remember how the Titanic was built, okay? Not built, okay? Build. It was billed as the ship that God could not sink. That's how it was built. The ship that God could not sink. Does anybody believe that pitch any longer? Does anybody go on that pitch? Listen, there were Christians that were on the Titanic when it sank, but there were a lot of arrogant people that were on the Titanic as well. I read a little bit of a history on the Titanic, and there were at least 7 warnings that were given to the Titanic that it was in a dangerous place, and all 7 of those warnings were ignored. The 7th of those warnings was one ship passing the Titanic, lantern to lantern, Morse code saying, turn around, you're heading into an iceberg field. And that message was interpreted, but not taken to the captain because he was resting, and they didn't want to disturb his sleep. Well, newsflash for you, I think his sleep was disturbed, okay, when the ship hit the iceberg and began to sink. 1,500 people lost their life that day. And if you've ever been to the Titanic Museum, you can go through the whole museum, and they'll give you a name at the beginning, and at the end you go and you look on the wall. I'm just telling you, your odds are you're dead, okay? All right? I mean, only 725 people survived, 1,500 people died. You get a piece of paper, you're likely dead. And I got my piece of paper, and I was a man, and so I knew my chances were even less because it was women and children first, okay? Then I found out that my man had a mistress on the Titanic as well as his wife on the Titanic, and I'm like, who gave the pastor this guy? I deserve to die, okay, for my sins. And sure enough, I get to the board at the end, and there's my name on the board. I died, okay? I died on the Titanic. And you can learn fascinating things there, but I think it's very, very interesting that it was built under pride. God could not sink this ship, and it sank. I think Daniel also reminds us here that Daniel had the spirit of the holy God. Again, this comes up again and again and again in these first chapters of Daniel. And while this troubled party is taking place, up to the front steps the queen in verse 10. And the queen, because of the words of the kings and the lords, came to the banquet hall. And the queen spoke to the king, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the Spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods was found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, and your father's king, and your father the king, made the chief of the magicians, astrologers, and Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, insomuch as an excellent spirit of knowledge and understanding, interpreting dreams and solving riddles and explaining enigmas was found in Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and let him give the interpretation. You know, I find it very, very interesting here is the queen knew this much about Daniel. But the first thing that she brings to the list of what she knows about Daniel is not, hey, there's a guy that can interpret dreams. There's a guy that can interpret riddles. There's a guy who interprets this kind of stuff. The first thing she brings to the table is that Daniel had the Spirit of the Holy God. You see, folks, what that reminds me of is even though the world around us, even though the culture around us is against God, they can recognize and they can see the Spirit of God on those who are his own. They can recognize it. They can see it. And that's why it is a worthy thing to continue to live for him. Well, Daniel's called, and it's interesting again here, Daniel's gifts are a reflection of the giver. Daniel's gifts are the reflection of the giver. And Daniel is brought to the, verse number 13, brought to the king, and he spoke to the king, and Daniel said, the king spoke to Daniel and said, "Are you Daniel, one of the captives of Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that you have the Spirit of God in you, and the light and understanding and excellent words are found in you. Now the wise men and astrologers, they've been brought in before me, that they should read the writing and make known its interpretation, and they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read this writing and make it known to me, its interpretation, I will clothe you with purple, and you shall have a gold chain around your neck, and you shall be third ruler in the kingdom." And so Daniel says before the king, "Let your gifts be yourself, and be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to you its interpretation." And then what Daniel does is Daniel rehearses again kind of the first 4 chapters of Daniel, saying, I've done this before. God's granted me the ability to do this before. God humbled Nebuchadnezzar so that he would not arrive at the prideful position where you are right now. And he says, oh, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you what that interpretation is. Verse 23 there. "And you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and you have brought the vessels of the house of the Lord before you and before your lords and your wives and your concubines, and have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know." Again, Daniel's calling out their idol worship and this feast in pleading for the gods of the Babylonians to protect them. "And God now holds your breath in his hands and owns all your ways, and you have not glorified." Daniel's gifts are a reflection of his giver, and the giver is bringing this pronouncement against the king. It's interesting, some of you have read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and there is a part of the C.S. Lewis allegory that confuses a lot of people. And that is in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, when Father Christmas shows up. And you're like, no, wait a minute. How can C.S. Lewis teach kids about Santa Claus? Okay, well, he's not called Santa Claus, okay, but he's portrayed as we know Santa Claus. And why in the world would Father Christmas be in Narnia, okay? Like Narnia is a real place. Anyway, what's interesting in the allegory is that Father Christmas gives the 3 children that are there each a gift. He gives Peter a sword. He gives Susan a horn and a bow, a horn that will call for help. And he gives Lucy a dagger, and he gives her a special ointment that can heal. And in the allegory, they all receive these gifts, and they don't know how useful they're going to be later. But they receive them. Peter, in turn, uses that sword to defeat the wicked witch. And Susan uses that horn to call for help from Aslan when she's being attacked by wolves. And Lucy uses her ointment to actually heal her brother Edmund. And they didn't know what those gifts were for. And of course, Father Christmas at the very end says, Aslan's on the move, and off he goes, and we put a silver lining around Father Christmas. Okay, all right, because he's giving a tribute there to Aslan. It's an allegory. It's just a picture of things. It's not dogma, okay? All right? But what is interesting is as the allegory plays itself out, they're given gifts, but they don't find out what those gifts are for until later. They don't find out how beneficial they are until later. And I think God's gifting us and giving us abilities and spiritual gifts are the exact same thing. They play themselves out as a reflection of the giver, and we may not know even now what that gift is given for, but one day God will put it to use. God gifted Daniel to be able to interpret these kind of things, and Daniel did not know how it was going to be used, but here he is in front of the co-regent king of Babylon, handwritings on the wall, and the king says, look, I will give you everything I possibly can give you if you'll just interpret it. He says, keep the reward. I'm still going to interpret it for you. And here's what the interpretation is. Look at verses 24 and verse number 25. Are you ready, kids? Keep your sheet out. Here we go. And the fingers then the fingers and the hand were sent from him, and this is the writing that was written. And there was an inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, okay? And this is the interpretation of each word. Mene, meaning that God has numbered your kingdom and it is finished. Says it twice. God has numbered your kingdom. Your days, the time of your kingdom is numbered, and it is done. It is finished. Tekel, meaning you've been weighed in the balances and you've been found wanting. You're light, okay? You're not weighty at this point. You're light. I still laughed the day I walked through the grocery store and I saw Hostess, Ho-Ho's, Light, L-I-T-E, light. If you're going to eat a Ho-Ho, just go for the Ho-Ho, okay, all right? I don't know how light Ho-Ho makes it any better, okay? But Ho-Ho light, it doesn't make any sense. And Tekel means, hey, Belshazzar, okay, the balance has been set and you're on the light side, not weighty here. And Paris or Upharsin, which means your kingdom has been divided and it's been given to the Medes and the Persians. And so what we know took place there in ancient Babylon is either King Cyrus had his armies divert the Euphrates River or put a dam in front of the Euphrates River to slow it enough that his soldiers could creep into Babylon. And while Daniel is giving that interpretation, Persian soldiers were already making their way into the city. Well, upon that interpretation, Belshazzar tries to go ahead and give a reward to Daniel. Then Belshazzar gave the command and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain or gold chain around his neck, and the proclamation concerning him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain. Reward didn't really mean a whole lot, did it? It was a human reward, and it was meaningless. Verse 31, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom being 62 years old. And the chapter turns again in the book of Daniel. Now, we're going to bring this series to a close here as we look at Daniel chapter 6 and as we examine Daniel's service under the Medo-Persian Empire, this conglomerate Persian Empire, and probably what has to be again on the top 5 flannel graph board stories of Sunday school and Daniel in the Lion's Den. We are going to take some time in our ABF groups at some point in time to go through the rest of Daniel, teaching through the rest of Daniel in our ABF groups. I'm not sure when that's actually on the schedule, but we have it on the radar there to finish the book of Daniel. But we're going to go ahead and look at chapter 6 again, Daniel serves with the exact same faithfulness under a different king, and a lesson is learned of another king, of another kingdom, that we've already seen some of these other kings learn, and that is that God is just and God will punish evil. So I think our takeaways here today are to, again, remain, as we've entitled our series here, uncompromising. Daniel does not compromise in any way, shape, or form. He tells Belshazzar exactly what God has said, and the kingdom falls. He doesn't take the human reward of mankind and run away with it, but he recognizes that God has held these evil kings accountable for their wrongs. And it's a great reminder to us, again, of God's faithfulness to Daniel and God's justness and when it comes to his stand against evil. Father, thank you again for these truths. Thank you for the opportunity to walk through them here this evening. I pray your blessing on us reminding ourselves of these things and living in these things. And even as Bruce prayed earlier here today, we do pray that you would provide much needed rain in this next week. We know that you make it rain on the just and the unjust, and we're just praying for the rain. And we know that farmers in our area need it desperately, and I pray that you would provide. Thank you for the good reminders from the word here tonight, and I pray your blessing on them. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Dr. Walker?
Stand.